Hello, I am Henry Borabach, host of Reef Exchanges, the podcast brought to you by the Reef Resilience Network. For 20 years, the network has been a global leader in training marine managers and other practitioners to effectively manage, protect, and restore coral reefs. We do this by turning scientific information and in-the-water experience into operational knowledge, tools, and guidance to help those who are tasked with caring for the world's reefs. This podcast is one of the methods we use to bring the latest science and strategies to marine managers to support effective management of critical coastal areas. 2025 also marks the network's 20th anniversary, which we are really excited about. We want to thank you and celebrate you, our network members, for sharing your time, expertise, and ideas with us. And, of course, for the hard and important work you do day in and day out to care for our world's reefs and marine areas. So, without further ado, let's dive on in. On this episode, I will be joined by my colleague, Dr. Anik Cross, Resilience Science Lead for the Reef Resilience Network, and Lauren Wenzel, Director of NOAA's National Marine Protected Areas Center. This episode is brought to you through the network's ongoing partnership with the Blue Nature Alliance to increase global capacity and knowledge exchange around critical topics for marine resource management. With that, I'm going to get out of the way here and hand it off to Anik to tell us more about what we'll be talking about today.
Hi, everyone. As Henry mentioned, I am the Reef Sciences Lead for the Reef Resilience Network, which means I get to read about all the great science that is relevant and sometimes not so relevant for our network members and coral reef managers, and I translate it into coherent information that they can use. Recently, I've been diving deeper into the topic of marine protected area management effectiveness to help network members and coral reef managers better understand their role in achieving effective management. MPA management effectiveness is not a new topic for the network. However, with IUCN's ambitious 30 by 30 commitment, aiming to increase the coverage of effectively conserved and managed area to 30%, there's renewed attention on how managers can play a pivotal role in achieving this goal and adopting best practices. So during my recent dive into 30 by 30, I've spoken with various experts in coral reef conservation, and there is one question that keeps coming up. How effective does an MPA need to be to count towards the 30 by 30 target? And until my recent conversation with you, Lauren, I haven't found a clear answer. That's why I'm so excited to explore this topic further with you today. But before we dive in, Lauren, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and, in honor of the Reef Resilience Network 20th anniversary, share a little bit about how you've engaged with the network over the years?
Sure. Thanks, Anik, and thanks for inviting me. Effective and equitable management of MPAs is a topic that's close to my heart, so I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. My comments today are my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of NOAA. And happy anniversary. It's also the MPA Center's 25th anniversary this year, so a great year to remember. NOAA has been involved with international MPA capacity building work for many years, and Reef Resilience is a great complement to this work. You have a great web platform and a lot of great online training and toolkits. So we really appreciate working with Reef Resilience, also as part of the MPA capacity building think tank, which is reimagining how local MPA managers and coastal communities can play a leadership role in conserving coastal ecosystems, with donors and international organizations supporting their efforts.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so to dive into our topic, I wanted to ask you again. So when we spoke late last year, I asked you about the minimum level of effective management needed for MPAs to count towards our country's 30 by 30 goal. And your answer really stood out. Could you please share it with our listeners?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, the 30 by 30 goal, which for those who don't follow this as closely is Target 3 of the Convention on Biological Diversity's Global Biodiversity Framework, specifically mentions effective conservation and management. And the earlier iCheat Target 11, which goes back to 2010, also talked about effective management. So this topic has been on our radar for years. But ultimately, it's up to the national governments that report their MPA status to decide what to include when reporting to the World Database on Protected Areas. And while there's a CBD target to report on management effectiveness, less than 20% of all protected areas report on it. So while there's a lot of great guidance out there describing what's needed for effective MPA management, there's no requirement for protected area programs to apply that guidance when tracking progress.
Lauren, do you know why that is? Why do you think there's currently no minimum requirement for management effectiveness towards the 30 by 30 goal? Do you think we'll eventually see those standards put in place?
I think there's always a push and a pull in the international arena between coming together to set ambitious goals, as we did with the 30 by 30 target, and the desire to defer to national governments about the best way to achieve those goals in their local context. So both CBD and IUCN are incredibly important in setting the bar high and providing the technical and management guidance about good practices. In 2018, IUCN actually combed through the existing Green List standards, which are the standards that IUCN established to describe what does an effective protected area look like. And they went through past IUCN resolutions to put together a standards document for MPAs. And those standards describe conditions that all MPAs should meet, such as implementing monitoring to track performance and not allowing industrial activities in or next to an MPA. But ultimately, it's still up to the managing agency to decide how they will apply these standards. And I'll give you an example. In the United States, one of the big MPA programs is the National Marine Sanctuary System. And it focuses primarily on resource protection, but it also allows many diverse uses in and next to sanctuaries. Sanctuaries are located next to wind energy leases on the Pacific coast and next to oil and gas operations in the Gulf of Mexico. And they work to reduce the impacts of these activities through interagency consultations.
It sounds like there's a lot of variation in what an effective MPA may be by the time it gets reported to IUCN. So what role do you think managers play in ensuring that the 30 by 30 initiative truly leads to meaningful protection? And how can they drive effective management of protected area to make this goal a reality?
I think managers play an incredibly important role in the meaningful implementation of 30 by 30 because managers are the ones who see the threats to marine ecosystems on a daily basis, and they're the ones on the ground and in the water working to address those threats. And we know that sufficient funding and resources, staffing, are critical to effective management, and most MPAs are not sufficiently funded and supported. Managers have to become experts at building partnerships and testing creative solutions to advance effective management. And by experimenting and partnering, managers can develop effective management approaches that maybe can be scaled up for adoption elsewhere. One example is that MPA managers are increasingly getting involved in restoration because our marine ecosystems have been so fundamentally degraded by human impacts, such as climate change and overfishing. But restoration has to be done right with the right species in the right places, or it won't succeed. And it needs to take current and future climate impacts into account. I also want to note the importance of regional networks of MPA managers, such as those in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and North America, because they play a key role in bringing managers together so they can share ideas and learn from each other.
Do you have any advice for managers who may feel a little bit overwhelmed by the current focus on 30 by 30? And are there any practical steps that managers can take to leverage 30 by 30 to support their day-to-day efforts in managing protected area, as opposed to maybe feeling like it's asking them additional work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anique. And I think the 30 by 30 goal can really be a political hot button issue. It's both strongly supported and strongly opposed in some quarters. So managers need to know their audience and speak to them in terms that they care about, including social and economic benefits as well as biodiversity. But MPA managers have a lot of credibility as experts about their areas, and they're a key link between local coastal communities and national and global conservation leaders. So I think managers need to continue to press policymakers and NGOs on the need for MPA quality, not just quantity, and the need for additional resources for existing MPAs. Otherwise, we may feel good about designating new MPAs, but we're just spreading existing resources thinner and thinner. MPA managers can get the attention of decision makers by telling stories about their places, including why they're so valuable to coastal communities and beyond, and what management tools are working and which ones aren't. One bright spot is the growing recognition that Indigenous peoples have deep knowledge, stewardship, and connections to their ancestral homelands. Indigenous-led conservation efforts and co-management are great models for conserving places, culture, and communities, especially when they're provided with recognition by national governments and provided with funding. So we need MPA managers and staff that reflect the diversity of coastal populations and Indigenous peoples. And another thing that MPA managers can do is mentor young people, hire great teams for our future ocean workforce, and be trusted partners with local communities.
Well, I think that is actually a fantastic note to end on. I think one of the ideas that has come up a lot as Anik and others on our team at the Reef Resilience Network have had these conversations with Lauren and people like you is just the idea that managers are sort of perfectly positioned to be advocates for their places. So, and like you were mentioning, for the ecology, but also for the community, and sort of across all of those dimensions of resilience that we think about when we think about effective management. So yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through sort of some of these fundamental steps about 30 by 30 and how we can be taking into account in our own management practices. And yeah, and how we can keep thinking about the future as well, and that next, the sort of continuing generations of MPA managers, but also young people, communities, and everyone really relies on and lives with these coastal ecologies. So again, Lauren and Anik, thank you so much for sharing this conversation with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners as well. You can find show notes and other episodes, as well as other resources like webinars, toolkits, and much more at reefresilience.org. And if you aren't already a member, please do join the network. You'll receive notifications of new resources like podcast episodes like this one. And also, we're very excited coming up later in spring of 2025, we're going to be launching a new online course about management effectiveness. And so if you enjoyed the conversation today, I think you have that to look forward to as well, to dig into. Anik and I have both been working on that one pretty hard lately. And so we're excited to see it coming into shape. But otherwise, we hope you'll tune in again to our next episode.